The whole is greater than the sum of its parts is a term coined by philosopher Aristotle in his early treatise Metaphysics. If you say something is greater than the sum of its parts, you mean it is better than you would expect from the individual parts because the way they combine adds a different quality. Applying this quote to theater presents a unique theoretical problem. Audience members see such a small fragment of the whole process, and most of them are content in never seeing the parts that make up the whole performance they are watching. But does the audience's ignorance of the parts actually impact the strength of the whole? Too often the details that go into creating a powerful show are left unnoticed by the theater-going audience. If the whole is the full production, its parts are everything from acting to costumes to scripts, then is the audience missing out on the whole by ignoring the sum of its parts? To begin, let me clarify that my interpretation of the whole is not the performance, but the production. The performance is part of the whole, just as sound and props are part of the whole. To consider with a performance, or only what happens on stage, as the whole, is to greatly reduce the impact of the rest of the production. The production does not exist without these parts. Here are just some of the parts that make up the whole of a performance. Most people notice the primary parts earliest, the acting, directing, and writing. Audiences will appreciate aesthetic parts of the performance next, the costumes, props, and set. Aspects like light, sound, makeup, and even sometimes music are background parts, and for most casual audience members, these are the hardest to detect. This is not to say that any part is less important to the whole of the production. Even subtle details, like for instance cool lighting design that highlights a character's sadness during an emotional scene, impacts the audience subconsciously. It highlights the emotional performance of the actor, and that performance is what the audience remembers. The parts are a lot more complex than they initially seem. Take costumes, for instance. They have to be designed and then turned into a pattern, and then the actor is measured, and now the designer has to buy fabric, and only then can they even start sewing. The actor needs to rehearse in costume too, and now they're subject to wear and tear, and a seamstress must be on hand to mend the ripped costumes before opening night. The amount of time and work that goes into every facet of every part of the whole is lost on the audience members leaving the show when the curtain drops. As someone who exclusively works backstage in theater, it admittedly saddens me that most of the audiences do not consider details. For example, how actors' shoes were picked because they match the costume's color scheme, the show's time period, and the character's personal style. But what would the audience catching those little details mean for the production as a whole? If the audience takes time to consider all the details that are the parts of the performance, it stands to reason that they would gain a deeper appreciation for the whole. But is my claim that audience members should be seeing those parts actually in conflict with the whole reason people go to the theater in the first place? When people sit down to watch a show, they suspend their disbelief and expect to be immersed in the fantasy world of the show. This immersion is why they bought the ticket in the first place, and it is this effect that the parts of the performance try to create. If the audience is aware of every detail of the backstage parts, they lose the fourth wall that separates the play world from their own. The illusion is broken and the driving force behind the parts is lost. The parts moving behind the scene to create the whole, the performance. So where does this leave us? The work that goes into every part of the performance should be considered and appreciated. However, the very intent of each of those parts is to contribute to a greater whole and suspend the audience's disbelief. The audience needs to believe that the actor is Prospero or Hamlet in order to appreciate the performance as a whole. If they discover that the actor is just saying what the script told him to say and was meticulously dressed, directed, and lit to appear the way the producer wants him to appear, there is an emotional dissonance between the actor and the audience. Audiences want the fantasy. They want to be immersed by the story and the characters, not the elements that created them. Of course, there are plenty of audience members who would like to see the parts in motion. I'm one of them. But the magic of the whole is compromised by exposure of the moving parts. Theater is a complex beast, and I do not think one answer to parts versus whole is more correct than another. Rather, the joy of theater comes from the audience's enjoyment and appreciation of both the parts and the whole. Audiences of live theater do understand that the person on stage is not the character that she is portraying, but they are willing to let her transport them into the story anyway. Audiences are always aware of the parts in the back of their minds, and being aware of the parts does not preclude them from enjoying the greater whole. In the world of theater, the whole is not necessarily greater than the sum of its parts, but rather the strength of the parts creates a much stronger whole. This may seem like a minute, nitpicky distinction, but it is important to understand. A strong whole is not strong because it is better or greater than its parts. It is strong because of the greatness of each and every one of those parts.